My daughter called me brilliant once. That was 31 years ago. She hasn't used that word since, and the worst part, neither have I. I'm going to tell you something that took me 6 decades to understand. Something I wish someone had grabbed me by the collar and said out loud when I was still young enough to change it. Most people don't lose their intelligence. They abandon it, slowly, quietly. One small decision at a time, and by the time they notice, they've been standing in the same mental room for 20 years, wondering why the walls feel so close. I'm 71 years old. I've buried 2 careers, 1 marriage, and more dreams than I can count. I've also rebuilt myself from rubble at an age when most people told me I was too old to try. So I know both sides of this road. I know what it looks like when a brilliant mind goes dark, and I know what it costs to light it back up again. If you're over 40, what I'm about to say may be the most important thing you hear this year, because the thief is already in your house, and it didn't break in. You left the door wide open. I grew up the smartest kid on my street. I don't say that to boast. I say it because it mattered. Because my mother used to rest her hand on my shoulder and tell me that my mind was the only inheritance she had to give me. She was a seamstress. We didn't have much, but I had this. I read everything I could find. I argued about philosophy with a plumber who lived 2 doors down. I stayed up until my eyes burned, not watching anything, just thinking, turning problems over in my mind like stones, looking for what was underneath. By 30, I had a career that demanded everything from me. By 45, I had mastered it, and that's exactly when the rot started, because I stopped being hungry. I thought I had arrived. I thought the hard part was over. I bought a comfortable house, fell into comfortable routines, surrounded myself with people who already agreed with everything I said, and slowly, without a single dramatic moment to warn me, the most powerful tool I had ever owned began to rust on the shelf. By 58, I couldn't remember the last time I had genuinely surprised myself. I used to be brilliant. Now I was just experienced. There's a difference, a heartbreaking one. What happened to me is not unique. It is happening right now to people who were once the sharpest minds in every room they entered. Doctors, engineers, writers, teachers, people whose intelligence once felt limitless, now running on a kind of mental autopilot that feels like stability, but is really just slow stagnation. I've spent the last 13 years studying this, reading the research, talking to neuroscientists, and more importantly, watching real human beings navigate the second half of their lives. Some of them thriving, most of them shrinking. I want to tell you what I found. Monsieur, the first trap, the comfort of being right. There was a man I worked with for 17 years, Gerald, one of the sharpest analysts I have ever encountered. In a meeting, Gerald could dismantle a flawed argument in under 2 minutes. Clean, precise, brutal. But Gerald had a problem. He had been right so many times for so many years that he had quietly stopped entertaining the possibility that he might be wrong about anything. I watched him over the years become less of a thinker and more of a verdict machine. Someone would present a new idea, and before they even finished the sentence, Gerald's face had already closed, already decided. He wasn't analyzing anymore. He was just confirming. And here is the brutal truth that nobody tells you. The brain is an efficiency-obsessed organ. It hates wasted energy. So the moment you stop genuinely questioning your own assumptions, it stops building new pathways. It just keeps widening the old grooves, the same roads, the same destinations. What Gerald had mistaken for wisdom was actually intellectual calcification. I wish I had recognized it in myself sooner, because I was doing the same thing in different rooms with a different accent. but the same closing of the mind. The advice is uncomfortable, but it's simple. Seek out the argument you don't want to hear. Sit with it. Don't swat it away. The discomfort you feel when a genuinely good counter-argument lands, that friction is your brain waking up. Let it burn. That's what growth feels like from the inside. The second trap, the shrinking circle. My father had a friend group of 11 men by the time he turned 50. Poker nights on Thursdays. Arguments about football and politics that went nowhere and meant everything. By 65, that circle had shrunk to 3. By 70, he was mostly talking to the television. He wasn't unfriendly. He was just tired of the effort. New people required explanation. Old friends required maintenance. And somewhere along the way, he had quietly decided that the cost of connection outweighed the reward. Nobody warned me that this was a death sentence. Not a dramatic one, a slow one. The kind that takes your vocabulary first, then your curiosity, then your ability to hold a complex thought for longer than 40 seconds. Neuroscience is clear on this now. Social engagement is not a luxury for the aging brain. It is infrastructure. Conversation, real conversation, the kind with friction and surprise and people who challenge you, lights up more of the brain simultaneously than almost any other activity. When my marriage ended at 54, I had a choice. Retreat into the four walls of a life that felt safe and small, or do something that terrified me. I signed up for a weekly debate group with strangers, half of them 20 years younger than me. I cannot describe how uncomfortable those first months were, how exposed I felt, how often I drove home convinced I had embarrassed myself, but something else was happening beneath the discomfort. My mind was waking up, reaching for words it hadn't used in years, forming positions, defending them, surrendering them, rebuilding the very muscle I'd been letting atrophy for a decade. The people who keep their minds sharp well into their 70s and 80s almost all share one thing. Not crossword puzzles, not supplements. People. Real, living, complicated, occasionally maddening people. Don't let your circle shrink down to a screen. The screen never pushes back. The third trap, the diet of easy information. I'm not going to pretend I saw this one coming. When I was 40, information was hard to find. You had to chase it, libraries, long articles, books that demanded something from you. You had to work to know things, and that work was secretly strengthening the very machinery you were using. Then everything changed, and I changed with it, gradually, then completely. I traded long books for short summaries, deep articles for reaction clips, complicated questions for whatever the algorithm decided I should already agree with. I told myself I was staying informed. I was actually getting softer. There's a difference between consuming information and processing it. Real thinking is slow. It's uncomfortable. It means holding two contradictory ideas in your head at the same time without immediately resolving the tension. Most modern information delivery systems are specifically designed to prevent that from happening. They want quick reactions, emotional spikes, certainty delivered fast, and every time you consume that way, you're training your brain to be a worse thinker. I started noticing the damage in conversations. I would open my mouth to explain something complex and find that I couldn't hold the full shape of the idea anymore. I had opinions, but I had lost the depth behind them. I was reacting, not thinking. Nobody told me that the greatest threat to my intelligence in my 50s wasn't aging. It was convenience. I made one rule that changed everything. 1 hour every day of something that cost me mental effort. A dense book, a foreign language documentary, learning a skill that makes me feel stupid at first. Anything that requires me to struggle, not just consume. The struggle is the medicine. Yes, the fourth trap, the story you keep telling yourself. This one is the hardest to say out loud. At some point in my early 50s, I had assembled a very complete story about who I was, what I was good at, what I was not built for, where my limits were, and I wore that story like armor, referred to it constantly. I've never been good with numbers. I'm not a creative person. I'm too old to start something like that. I had confused my history with my identity. And here is what I now understand with absolute certainty. The brain believes what you tell it, not metaphorically, literally. Neuroscientists call it self-directed neuroplasticity. The internal narrative you rehearse repeatedly actually shapes the physical architecture of your brain. Your thoughts are not just thoughts. They are construction workers, and they're always building something. My friend Carol is 74 years old. She learned to code at 67. Not because she was naturally gifted. She is the first to laugh and tell you she failed her first 3 courses. She did it because someone told her she couldn't, and something deep inside her simply refused the verdict. She told me once, the story I almost believed would have been the most expensive lie I ever bought. Every time you catch yourself saying, I'm not someone who, stop. Just stop. Ask where that sentence came from. Ask whether it's a fact or a habit. Ask who decided it and whether they had the authority to. You are not the same person you were at 30. The question is whether the person you're becoming now is chosen or just inherited. The fifth trap, the deferred life. This is the one I cannot talk about without feeling the weight of it. For most of my 50s, I told myself I was preparing, saving up courage for the things I actually wanted to do with my mind and my life, the book I was going to write, the language I was going to learn, the course I was going to teach. One day, when things settled, when the timing was right, when I had more energy, I did not understand that waiting is also a decision, that every year spent in the waiting room is a year not spent in the room where things actually happen. My mother died at 69. She had a notebook she'd carried for 30 years, full of ideas, observations, half-written pages of something that might have been beautiful. She never showed it to anyone while she was alive. I found it in a drawer that still smelled like her, and I sat with that notebook for a long time, grieving 2 things at once, the woman who was gone and the book she never let herself write. I made a decision that day that I have kept every day since. I will not defer the work that matters, not for comfort, not for permission, not for a more convenient season of my life that may never arrive. The brain you're protecting is not a future investment. It is the present. It is right now. And every day you don't use it for something that genuinely challenges and excites you, you are handing it over to entropy, and entropy is not a patient landlord. It collects. The part that still wakes me up at night. I said at the beginning that my daughter once called me brilliant. What I didn't tell you is what happened at dinner 3 years ago. She was talking about something she was working on, a complicated project, and she stopped mid-sentence and said, "Actually, Dad, I want your real opinion on this, not the safe one." And I realized she had been getting the safe one for years. I had been so comfortable in my own conclusions that I had stopped offering her anything genuinely useful. I had been performing wisdom instead of living it. That sentence cracked something open in me. I've spent the last 3 years rebuilding, loudly, imperfectly, embarrassingly at times, reading things that confuse me, talking to people who see the world completely differently, picking up skills I have no talent for just to remember what it feels like to be a beginner. And a few months ago, in a conversation where I had said something that genuinely surprised both of us, my daughter looked at me and said very quietly, "There you are." 2 words, but I understood them completely. If you've stayed with me this long, it means something in what I've said has landed somewhere real. You are not too old. You are not too set in your ways. You are not past the point where any of this matters. But I am asking you, as someone who nearly lost the most valuable thing they ever had, to look honestly at your days, at what you consume, at who you talk to, at what story you keep telling yourself, at what you've been deferring until some imaginary future version of your life that's never going to arrive on its own. The mind you protect starting today is the one you'll be thinking with in 10 years. Don't let it go quiet. Don't let it go convenient. Don't let it go. If this reached you somewhere real, I'd be grateful if you shared it with someone who needs to hear it. And in the comments, I want to know, what is the one thing you've been putting off that your mind is quietly hungry for? Tell me. No judgment, just tell me.